She didn't knock. She didn't call. She kicked the door open like she owned the lake. Live stream rolling. Red blazers snapping in the wind. Her voice already halfway through a speech she thought would make her famous. But what she didn't know, what her 15,000 viewers didn't know, was that the person sitting in my grandfather's recliner wasn't just a guest. She was the Attorney General. And every second Delilah Cromwell kept talking was another felony caught on camera. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was the moment her entire criminal empire started to collapse, and she was the one broadcasting it. Some mornings on Clearwater Lake felt like they were borrowed from a postcard no one had gotten around to sending. The air tasted like cold pine and sun-warmed water. My days were predictable in a way that felt earned. Coffee in the old enamel mug Pop left me. Boots on the porch rail. A quiet scan of the horizon for loons teaching their chicks to dive. That cabin wasn't luxury. It was history you could touch. Every plank in the porch was set by my grandfather's hands. Every notch in the stone fireplace chiseled one winter when the snow came early. The solar panels hummed on the roof with the steady confidence of something built to last. The kind of place that stayed the same no matter what the world decided to do. By the time I'd retired, 30 years of installing power grids in trenches that swallowed the light, this patch of lakefront had become my entire idea of peace. No HOA rules taped to the door. No committee approvals for the color of my shutters. Just 2 acres that answered to nobody but the weather and me. Pop had a saying for everything. About fishing, he'd tell me the lake always knows when you're impatient. About property, he'd lean in close and murmur, if someone wants your land bad enough, there's a reason they're not telling you. At the time, it sounded like folksy paranoia. Later, it would play like prophecy. The first time I saw her, she didn't belong to the lake the way the rest of us did. Too polished, too exact. A white SUV with vanity plates, idling at the dock like it had never touched gravel roads. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from winning arguments before they start. A clipped smile, a clipboard hugged, to her side like a weapon. Back then, I thought maybe she was lost, an agent looking for a listing, or a summer guest trying to find the rental next door. I couldn't have guessed that, months later, she'd be standing in this same doorway with a live stream audience and a felony waiting to happen. That morning, the only thing out of place was the sound of her heels ticking against the dock planks, and the folded notice she taped to my screen door without a word. It started small, the kind of petty inconvenience you could almost laugh about if it didn't carry that aftertaste of intent. 3 days after the folded notice appeared on my door, a second one arrived, this time in an envelope stamped with violation citation in red so thick it bled through the paper. Unsightly dock structure damaging community property values. A $500 fine due in 72 hours, or daily penalties will accrue. They were talking about the dock Pop built with me when I was 12. We'd reinforced the planks that summer with salvaged beams from an old marina, sealing each nailhead under tar so the winter freeze wouldn't split them. That dock had weathered 40-odd years of storms without so much as a loose board. Now, it was apparently an eyesore threatening the neighborhood's financial future. I walked the length of it that afternoon, feeling the solid give of the wood under my boots, listening to the water slap against the pilings. Everything about it said permanent, except the fine in my hand. When I knocked on her door to clear up the misunderstanding, she didn't invite me in. Just leaned against the frame in a blazer that probably cost more than my truck's transmission, the faint chemical bite of her perfume swirling out into the sun. Everyone here answers to the board, she said, voice dipped in honey with a barb underneath. Ask your neighbors how well fighting us worked out for them. It wasn't a threat so much as an announcement. By the end of the week, I had 3 more citations, solar panels out of compliance, a vegetable garden impairing view corridors, and non-regulation railings on the porch. Pop carved himself. Each fine stacked like bricks in a wall she was building between me and the life I'd earned here. Then came the strangers. A man with a clipboard pacing my shoreline, sketching the outline of the cabin in the air with his pen. A woman I'd never seen before photographing my driveway from a parked sedan. None of them waved. None of them spoke. But I could feel the questions they were planting in my neighbors' minds. And the neighbors, some stopped meeting my eyes when I passed. Conversations cut short when I walked into the general store. A message in the community Facebook group, no names mentioned, but just specific enough, warning that certain properties were bringing down values. It was a drift at first, not a landslide, but every day the current pulled a little harder. Pop's old warning kept looping in my head. If they want your land, find out why. So I started looking closer. And the closer I looked, the more the piece I'd built began to feel like it was running out on a clock. I hadn't said it wasn't the fines that convinced me this was more than a neighborhood power trip. It was the coordination, the way each strike landed before I'd had a chance to recover from the last dot. First came the certified letter, law firm header, 4 paragraphs of legalese, and the not so subtle threat of a lien against my property. Alleged illegal extension into community waterway. I'd read enough contracts in my working years to know when someone was trying to bluff me. So I went where Pop would have gone, down to the county courthouse, into the dust and quiet where the truth lives on paper. Betty at the records desk didn't just hand me my grandfather's deed, she slid it across the counter with a look. That said, you're going to want to sit down. 50 feet into the lake. Stamped, sealed, 1963, long before the HOA even existed. The dock was mine in the way mountains belong to themselves. I should have felt relief. Instead, I drove home with my stomach in a knot, and that's when I found her Escalade parked sideways across my driveway like some kind of personal checkpoint. Window cracked just enough for her voice to slide through. Oh, Marcus, I'm just reviewing the parking regulations. Might be here a while. From there, the drumbeat quickened. An environmental concern over my septic system that had passed inspection the month before. An anonymous tip to the fire marshal about hazardous solar wiring, the same system I'd installed to code myself. A building inspector crawling my attic with a tape measure, muttering apologies while logging suspected non-permitted improvements that didn't exist. On paper, it all looked legitimate, a string of agencies doing their jobs. In reality, it was death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. And if you looked closely enough, each inspection, each notice, each knock came within days of a new Facebook post from her account painting certain residents as unsafe, unsightly, or unfit for the community. That was the first time I felt the edge of something colder than harassment. This wasn't personal inconvenience anymore. This was reputation erosion. A slow, public unmaking of who I was in this place, designed to make resistance look like guilt. Neighbors I'd known for decades crossed the street rather than share a hello. Others whispered apologies in private, admitting they'd been told to keep their distance for their own good. One older couple hinted she had ways of making non-compliance expensive, and yet, even as my days filled with inspections, violations, and the low-grade hum of suspicion. Her moves felt almost rehearsed, like I was the latest actor in a play she'd staged before. That's when the question stopped being, how do I make her leave me alone, and became, what's the real script she's running here? I didn't know it yet, but that shift from defending my cabin to investigating hers was the first step toward pulling on a thread that connected far beyond our lake. It was an ordinary Tuesday on the surface, the kind of day where the lake's calm could almost convince you that nothing bad was closing in. But the stack of envelopes on my kitchen table told a different story. Fines, certified letters, inspection notices, each with a different letterhead, but all beating the same drum. I'd been treating them like individual battles, swatting at each one, thinking the point was to make me bend. But something in the rhythm of their arrival, the sequence, the timing, started gnawing at me. This wasn't random harassment. It was a campaign. I spread everything across Pop's old dining table like a jigsaw puzzle. That's when I noticed it, a tiny footer on one of the newer citations. Fines payable to Lakeside Community Improvement Fund. Account hashtag 847291.Community Improvement Fund sounded official. Until you've lived enough years to know that sometimes the prettiest labels hide the darkest rot. I drove back to the courthouse, back to Betty in the records room, and asked to see every public filing for the HOA. The numbers hit like a slap. Hundreds of thousands in emergency dock repairs that never happened. Landscaping contracts awarded to a company incorporated just weeks after our new president took office, owned by her brother-in-law. Insurance claims for storm damage on days the weather reports showed nothing but blue skies. Betty's voice dropped low. Marcus, this looks like fraud, and not small-time fraud either. I left with photocopies that felt heavier than paper. Out on the courthouse steps, the late afternoon sun hit them like evidence under an interrogation. Lamp back at the lake, I started cross-checking dates. The fines against me lined up perfectly with big withdrawals from that improvement fund. And I wasn't alone. Neighbors who'd sold recently had all been cited in waves, just before cash buyers swooped in. That was the moment it clicked. Her mission wasn't to make me follow the rules. It was to drive me off my land, cheapen it, and feed it into whatever development machine she was part of. The fines, the inspectors, the gossip, all tools in a single, sharpened plan, and I could feel the walls closing in. Because if I'd found this much by accident, then she'd already realized I was looking. The stakes weren't just my peace. Anymore, it was my name, my home, and maybe my safety. Once I understood what she was running, the only thing left was to catch her in it. Problem was, she didn't rattle easy, at least, not in ways that showed. Every fine, every inspection, every smear campaign landed like it was part of a script she'd rehearsed for years. If we wanted her to break character, we had to write a scene she couldn't resist. That's where the Attorney General came in. One phone call from a lawyer friend, and suddenly the meeting to review my evidence wasn't happening in a city office. It was happening right here, in the same cabin she'd been circling like a vulture. Symbolic, yes, but also bait. If she so much as heard state investigators were on my porch, her need to control the narrative would override every ounce of self-preservation she had left. We prepped like we were wiring a job site for explosives. Hidden cameras in the beams, audio mics tucked into lamp bases and book spines, unmarked cars stationed on the access road, undercover officers fishing on the lake, every angle covered, every exit planned, the whole place humming with the quiet energy of a sprung trap waiting for the footstep. And while we waited, she got sloppy, sabotaged solar wiring, caught on a lens I'd mounted near the inverter. Boat untied from its moorings and left drifting chain cuts clean and deliberate. Septic system poisoned with chemicals you couldn't just pick up at the hardware store. Each act darker, meaner, more expansive than the last, and each one documented down to the minute. She set foot on my property. She didn't just come for me anymore. She went after anyone standing near me. The electrician who'd backed me publicly found his business license under review. The retired judge who'd given me advice got slapped with a bogus bar complaint. The Veterans Hall that hosted our community meetings suddenly faced fire code shutdowns. It was pure mob logic. Hurt one, scare 100. But underneath the malice, you could smell it, desperation. Her posts grew more erratic, the language more theatrical, painting herself as the lone warrior under siege by faceless powers. Neighbors started stepping back, not out of loyalty to me, but because they could see her losing her grip. Then we heard the whisper. She'd told someone she knew exactly when the Attorney General would be here. She was bringing her own cameras to expose the corruption, which meant only one thing. She was about to hand us everything we needed, live in one uninterrupted take. On the morning of the meeting, the lake was glass-till, like it knew something was coming. The coffee steamed on the table. Files were laid out in neat stacks. And somewhere beyond the tree line, the low growl of her engine was already on the air. The air in the cabin felt charged, like the pause before a summer storm. The Attorney General sat across from me, methodically turning through the thick binder of evidence I'd laid out, her pen scratching notes in the margins. Every so often, one of the undercover officers stationed outside would murmur into a mic, updating positions we didn't even need to check. We knew she was coming. The sound reached us first, a distant rev climbing too fast, eating up the gravel road, then the sharp report of loose stones slapping the undercarriage. Her approach had the urgency of someone who believed this was her moment. The Escalade appeared through the front window like a ghost ship, breaching fog, pearl paint throwing back the sunlight, vanity plates flashing once before the brakes. Squealed, doors slammed. Voices barked orders about camera angles and going live. The Attorney General didn't even look toward the noise. When she comes through that door, she said evenly, "Stay seated." I barely had time to nod before the porch began to tremble under the rapid-fire click of heels. Her voice arrived half a second ahead of her body, pitched to carry. "This is it, folks. They can't hide it any longer." Then impact. The door burst inward, wood shrieking, hinges giving way in a single, violent motion. Splinters across the hardwood, and there she was, framed in the wreckage, phone held high, live stream icon glowing, pupils blown wide with the adrenaline of self-righteousness. She didn't register the second coffee mug on the table, or the woman rising slowly from the recliner. She didn't clock the steady red light tucked into the bookshelf, or the two shadows shifting in the far corners of the room. She launched into her script, a legal meeting, political persecution, my rights as president of this community, each phrase more breathless than the last. Her audience in the palm of her hand, or so she thought. The Attorney General stepped forward, badge open in one hand. "Mrs. Cromwell," she said, voice calm enough to draw the air. "Out of the room, I am the Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence." The words landed like a gavel. For a heartbeat, Karen's face froze. Brent, brain scrambling to reconcile the role she thought she was playing with the one unfolding in real time. That's when Agent Torres stepped in from outside, flanked by 2 federal officers. "You are under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and criminal harassment. And thanks to your broadcast, we now have a live confession in front of thousands." The handcuffs snapped shut with a sound you could feel in your teeth. Her phone slid from her grip, clattering to the floor, still streaming to an audience, now watching the myth of their hero collapse in high definition. I stood then, not to gloat, though God knows I'd earned it, but because this was the moment the fight ended. "Mrs. Cromwell," I said, voice steady, "meet the person who's been waiting to go over your books." Outside, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the noise, the flashing lights, the impossible sight of the woman who terrorized them, being led away past the same dock, the same panels, the same porch she'd tried to erase. No one spoke. The only sound was the rattle of the patrol car door closing behind her. For the first time in months, the lake was silent. But this time, it wasn't watching me. It was watching her disappear. The patrol car's taillights vanished around the bend, swallowed by the tree line. And for the first time in months, the only sound left on my porch was the wind moving through the pines. No idling engines, no rapid clicks of designer heels on wood, just the lake breathing like it used to. Words spread fast. By nightfall, half the community had gathered near the dock, not to watch, but to talk. People who'd been silent for months found their voices again. Some came to apologize for looking away when the pressure was on. Others to offer their own stories, now that they knew they weren't standing alone. The changes came quicker than I expected. The HOA dissolved within weeks, its community improvement fund frozen under court order. Restitution checks started landing in the mailboxes of those she'd bled dry. The families who'd sold under duress were invited to reclaim their properties at fair market rates. A few came back. Others just seemed relieved to have the choice. For me, the biggest shift was the silence, the good kind. Mornings returned to coffee and loon calls instead of certified mail. Neighbors dropped by with pie instead of petitions. The same porch she'd stood on to declare her authority became the place we planned the first Clearwater Lake Festival, raising money for veterans' housing programs instead of emergency dock repairs. The Attorney General kept her promise, too. Our case became the backbone of new laws, annual independent audits for all HOAs, real penalties for harassment disguised as enforcement, protections for homeowners whose only crime was not fitting. Someone's vision. She even named part of the bill after my family, something Pop would have grinned about for weeks, and me. I took some of that whistleblower reward and built a guest cabin, a safe place for anyone fighting their own. The version of this battle, because the truth is, this story could have happened anywhere. And until more people stand their ground, it will happen again now. When the sun slides low over the water and the pines throw long shadows across the dock, I think about the night before the takedown, about Pop's words in the margin of that old Bible. Sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for something bigger than himself. Out here, in the quiet, you can almost hear him saying it still.